Hello everyone and welcome to the next Haining Mythic guide. This is Roger Brown and as always, I have Joshua with me.
Welcome back everyone. Hope you guys managed Brackenspore. If you're going Tectus first, I hope you guys can manage this boss really fast as well.
Yeah, Tectus and Brackenspore, as we discussed on the Brackenspore video, are pretty much the same difficulty, so you get to pick which one you want to go for first. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about Tectus, which is a very short and not so difficult fight. Then rage is not even an issue. We're looking at 3 to 4 minutes fight max, and the only thing you need is a lot of DPS.
Yeah, because this fight is going to be about mostly the DPS, you're only going to need 2 tanks and 3 or 4 healers. If you use 3 or 4 healers, it's going to depend on the phase 2, which we'll talk about later. You're going to need to make the DPS requirement there to make the fight a lot easier for everyone.
Yeah, it's one of those fights where bringing an extra healer will actually cause the raid to take way more damage than he will heal, so it's pointless bringing an extra healer. So as soon as the fight starts, you want all your ranged DPS and healers stacking up in one of the corners of the room, for example, one of the entrances, as you can see in the video, and you want the boss position close to that ranged camp and a bit to the right, but not too close. And the reason for this positioning is because of the tactic that we're going to be using for the crystalline barrage kiting, which we'll go into detail later. But yeah, for the whole phase 1, you keep the boss there and the whole range are gathered in one of the edges.
To explain this fight, we're going to split up the fight in 3 phases. Phase 1, which we're going to talk about now, is the starter phase, where we only have the boss up. The boss will be casting Fracture, which is going to be the little pillar spawning below everyone's feet. Well, not everyone's feet. It's mostly going to be in melee range, but if ranged moves too close to the boss, it might occur there too, so as a range, to make sure you also watch there. How to avoid these is not that hard, you just move left or right from them. It's only one spawning at a time. There's also still going to be spawning Night Twisted adds, both Earthwarper and Berserkers. You'll want the grip on the Earthwarper because they're going to be casting their abilities and you don't want those abilities to go off. You can assign someone to stun these adds, which will help and prevent their cast from going off, and it might even increase the damage done to them because they'll be not moving and standing right under the boss if the grip was correctly done. The Berserkers will just charge around and hit the tank, so if you can spare a guy to stun them when they're casting their charge, this will help, but it's not required.
Yeah, and the 2 most important abilities though in the whole phase and actually the whole fight are the crystalline barrages and the earthen pillars. So for the pillars, they're gonna spawn on a random ranged player. That's why we're all gathered up on one spot to make sure that they spawn on the location that we want them to. Once the first one has spawned, everyone moves a little bit clockwise to the left and make sure to spawn the second one right next to the first one. There's a big difference in Mythic compared to Heroic. There's actually 2 pillars spawning from the boss instead of 1. There's one at 25 energy and one at 50 energy. So make sure that you are aware of the boss's energy and ready to move, because they do actually one-shot you still. For the crystalline barras, because of the positioning that we have of the ranged camp and the boss, it's actually very easy to kite them clockwise again by making a small arc in between the 2 groups, the melee group and the ranged group. So as you can see here, the people who get the debuff just move clockwise and make sure to not step on anyone else with the line.
When phase 1 is about to end, which will be when Tectus is about to die, and since you can only kill him during the tectonic upheaval, you'll want to kill him during the first tectonic upheaval. If you can't kill him during the first tectonic upheaval, you'll take too much damage, and this is why we brought less healers and more DPS, because making the DPS to kill him before the first tectonic upheaval will just reduce the rate damage by a lot.
And not only that, but because of the way the boss works, and because of the fact that the earthen pillars actually do not despawn over time in Mythic difficulty, if the boss actually heals and you have to go through another phase of the boss reaching 100 energy, it means he's gonna spawn 2 extra pillars, which are gonna limit your room overall, and you do not want that. So make sure you make that DPS check.
When the boss dies during the cast of Tectonic Upheaval, unlike in Heroic and Normal, he's going to respawn this time together with his 2 adds that he splits up in. He'll respawn with low health, and this is going to be your first priority in this phase. He doesn't have to be casting Tectonic Upheaval this time to die. He'll still leave behind the sand pile when he dies again, so make sure you drag him to the side of the room, as we are having him here in video from the start already, because there's no need to wait with dragging him there. You can just get him there from the start, so you don't have to move at all until you finish all of phase 1 and the start of phase 2. Once the boss dies the second time, you can drag the small adds to around the middle of the room, so the ranged will have enough range to actually DPS them, because they've been spawning pillars from the start and they've been moving away from the boss so far.
Yeah, and once you are in those new positions, you need to keep in mind, now there are 2 Tectuses basically. So that means that there will be 2 earthen pillars spawning around the same time. In order to make sure that they spawn in proper positions, there are 2 things you can do. The one tactic is to split the ranged group, half of them moving a little bit closer to the boss and half of them sticking to the wall, so that the 2 pillars are gonna spawn one in front of the other. And once they spawn, and hopefully around the same time, within, 1 second, you just move sideways to the left, clockwise as always, and wait for the second wave of pillars, which will come at 50 energy. Now the second tactic you can do, and as you can see here, this is what we need to do, because of the crystalline barrages limiting the area that you can move around, we actually all gather up and spawn the pillars one next to the other. And the way you avoid getting hit from them is just using a stampeding roar and outrunning both of them to the left. And once you've dealt with both of the spawns of the earthen pillars, you can just stand still and DPS both of the shards. Now the important thing here is to make sure that the DPS is balanced on both of them. Because of the way that the energy works, if you DPS one of the 2 shards of Tectus more than the other, it's gonna start gaining more energy than the other one. That will cause the DPS check to be tighter than it needs to be. Keep the DPS as balanced as possible and make sure that you keep that throughout the whole phase 2 so that you can actually kill them both before the first tectonic upheaval.
If you've been paying attention to the video so far, you've also noticed that Night Twisted Earth Warpers and Night Twisted Berserkers are still spawning in this phase, and they're going to be spawning in the last phase as well. You'll still want to have to grip the Earth Warper and stun them every time, just like in phase 1. That doesn't change, and you just cleave them down together with the bosses.
Now once the 2 shards start casting Tectonic Upheaval, the ranged camp is already gathered up, and you want to use all the raid cooldowns you have with the 3 or 4 healers, and pump as much healing as possible to keep the raid alive. Because once that AoE damage is done, there's no more damage taken for the raid, pretty much. So use all the raid cooldowns there and personal survivability, and make sure that they both die before they finish their casts. If one of them survives, it will get a lot messier and probably will cause a wipe. I mean, you can still go for it, but it's gonna mean more earthen pillars and more chaos.
You're just making the fight harder on yourself by not making the DPS check, and that's why, again, we dropped down to 3 healers for this fight. As soon as you finish both shards of Tectuses at the same time, they are going to respawn as well, again, just like the boss in the first phase towards the second phase. They're going to respawn again with low health, and they're going to be your first priority of killing, because if you don't kill them, they'll still do their abilities, and they're going to hit harder than the tank. As soon as they respawn, they're also going to spawn their split forms, which is the modes of Tectus. There's going to be 8 of them, and you're going to want to save Bloodlust for this phase, and you're going to use Bloodlust as soon as you see them spawning, so you don't do it too late and don't do it too early, because you're going to need all the 40 seconds of it. For the crystalline barrages in this phase, since there's going to be 10 adds up until you kill the 2 shards of Tectuses that respawn, there's going to be a lot of crystalline barrages, and people might panic, but you should not panic with them. Like, when you get the debuff, you just move, just like in phase 1 and 2, just move clockwise and keep running and don't mess the room up and flood the room everywhere.
Yeah, there's actually so many of the crystalline barrages going on that pretty much every single ranged DPS and healer are gonna get one. And yeah, it gets a lot of red stuff all around the room. The most important thing in the last phase, which, as Joshua was saying, is not gonna last that long, probably looking around 45 seconds. So it's a very bursty phase, but no matter what you do, you're still gonna get 8 pillars spawning when they reach 25 energy, the modes of Tectus, and another 8 when they reach 50 energy. So that's a total of 16 earthen pillars. And that's usually when wipes are caused, if the earthen pillars are spawned in bad locations. The most important thing is that you want the first 8 earthen pillars to be spawned on the edges of the room. So obviously with all of these crystalline barrage kiting going on, you can't keep the ranged group gathered up anymore. What you need to do is just kite those crystalline barrages and then find a spot for yourself in one of the edges of the room to spawn the pillars. Once the first wave of the pillars have spawned, move a bit forward and spawn the second wave of pillars as good as you possibly can, making sure that you don't cut off half of the raid on one side and half of the raid on the other side. As long as the crystalline barrages and the earthen pillars are done properly, then the adds should be kept all together and not split up. And because of their high tank damage that there's going to be throughout this whole phase, the tanks need to have some personal survivability cooldown throughout this whole phase. So make sure that you ask for external cooldowns if you need them.
Yeah, unlike phase 1 and 2, the tanks are not going to be just standing still, because we're going to be so many crystalline barrages going on, and there's going to be so many fractures happening that the tanks will most likely going to have to sidestep or backpedal a little bit to avoid these abilities and not take extra damage, because the damage is already so high, and if you take these extra abilities, you're going to die, and that's not going to end good.
Oh yeah, I've tanked this fight with my paladin in heroic mode, and the fractures are under your feet 24/7. You have to keep moving. And if all of this is done properly, fight will really feel very short. But to quickly sum it up in a few points that you need to keep track of. First of all, you need to spawn good pillars throughout the whole fight. So don't spawn any bad pillar because you were kiting a crystalline barrage and you forgot to go back to the ranged group. Make sure that you always spawn them where they are supposed to be spawned. Second of all, kill the Night Twisted Earth Warpers as fast as possible. That's why you need to death grip them in. You kind of need a Death Knight, and you need to make sure that they don't cast anything. Otherwise it could cause a wipe because of the massive AoE cone damage that they do. And lastly, you need to make sure that you look out around yourself in the last phase, because it's all about personal survivability. If you stand in the crystalline barrage and you're not paying attention that someone is coming at you, and you don't move a little bit away to not be in his way, then you're gonna die. If you don't react fast to the earthen pillars or you get yourself trapped, that's also bad. So situational awareness is a high priority in the last phase.
As far as debuffs go in this fight, there is only one, and it's really important that all the ranged, and even melee, because it might show you that you're standing in it, although most of the time when you stand in it you'll die, and the debuff is Crystalline Barrage this time.
Yeah, just look out for the debuff, because it actually doesn't show the accurate time, the duration of it chasing you. It will actually stop chasing you around 6 seconds remaining. So just look for it visually and see when it actually stops chasing you.
Another thing to look out for is using immunities in the last phase for the Crystalline Barrages. If you have Deterrence and especially Blessing of Protection on the healers so they can stand still and heal the tanks, it means they don't have to kite the Crystalline Barrages and they can just stand still. But make sure you move out of it as the immunity is about to end, because if you don't move you'll still die. As a melee in the last phase, you can also just hit the bosses from the front. It's not very important to be behind them, because if you are behind them and Crystalline Barrages spawn or Earthen Pillars that you missed, it'll just cause your death, and it is more important to survive, and dead DPS does no DPS.
Yeah, not to mention that if you get hit from a fracture, it's actually better to get knocked towards the tanks than to get knocked backwards towards the ranged DPS. Yeah, so this has been the Tectus guide. Hope you guys enjoyed it. You'll actually find out that sometimes if you do all of these things properly, you won't even realize that the boss is dead. I've had situations where we're like, wait, is it over already? So hope you have one of those pleasant surprises, and good luck, guys.
And luck is definitely what you're going to need in the last phase.